Where's Madeline? Thank you so much. I didn't come here meaning to cry, but and we all see you. So thank you. Happy New Year. And just to get out of the way, because this could be distracting, like you're wondering why on earth is she wearing that sweater. Number one, I was inspired by Tom. It says, unicorns slay better. Slay better, I know. And I had to I admit to Googling it because I thought, I really hope this isn't some weird pop culture reference that doesn't mean what I think it means, and I would be really embarrassed if I read it. But I just thought, Tom's got his Christmas stormtrooper. And I was like, well, I'll see your stormtrooper and I raise you a rainbow unicorn. And Darth Vader's going to be next. Okay, I don't know how I'm going to top that. But one of my intentions in the coming year is to be more bold. To not, and I said this in the group this morning at 9:00. One of the things I want to let go of is letting what other people think of me, of what I have to say, of what I'm doing, stop me or slow me down. And if I'd thought about, they're going to judge me if I wear this goofy sweater that I find is very funny, then, I have to let that go. And besides, I was at, Andy and I went to, is it St. John's? Where's Andy? Yeah, is it St. John's Episcopal? And there was a guy that was wearing a sweater, bright red and green, and it said, "Yay, Jesus, it's your birthday." I was like, daggone it. So anyway, in 2011, Andy and I made our first and so far only trip to Maui. There were lots of things that were different that I noticed than there are in the mainland. But what I noticed and loved the most were the flowers and the trees. And on the second day, I happened to look up and I noticed that there were metal bands around the tops of the palm trees, like right near the root of where the palms go out. And I thought, I think I said out loud, I wonder what those bands are for. And without even thinking about it, it's actually in my back pocket. I reached out, I pulled out my phone, I Googled metal rings, palm trees, and within a second I had the answer. And in the next second, I realized, wow, that was really lazy. I had a question, I knew where to get the answer, and I just went straight for it. So I missed an opportunity to use my imagination, to think through what possible reasons there could be for a metal ring to be around the top of a palm tree. Now, if it had been a child that had asked me that question, I hope that I would have said, I have no idea. What do you think that metal ring is there for? But I'm an adult with a phone in my pocket, and I need to know the answer. I can't not know. So since then, I've been more mindful about needing quick and easy answers, and I try to be more patient and resist trying to fill that information gap as quickly as possible. The mindfulness shows up in small ways. There are the "what could this mean" moments, like the ring on the tree. There are also times when I have to challenge myself to access my memory or to piece something together. For instance, Andy and I listen to Blue Lake Public Radio a lot in the car. And often, of course, you get in and they're in the middle of a piece and you don't know what it is. And so we challenge ourselves like, well, what period is this piece? What's the composer? Can we try to guess it without defaulting to just saying, here, I'm just going to look it up real quick on their website. So we try to stretch a little bit and play a little guessing game. And then, of course, when we get it right, or even if we get it wrong, we're like, yeah, there's a little dopamine hit that happens. The same thing can be true if I'm watching television, watching a movie or a TV show. How many of you have been watching something and you're like, that actor, I've seen them before. Where have I seen them? Well, we know, I can quickly pull out my phone and look up IMDb and find out just like that. But instead, I really try to sit with it and say, okay, think, listen to their voice, think about, picture them, just as a way to stretch and to just not be satisfied with what's the quick and easy answer? How can I access my memory? I really try to wait. So these are questions that have an answer, and the answer is readily available. But we cheat our imagination and our memory and our problem-solving skills when we default to checking Google immediately. My experience as a coach has ingrained in me the importance of giving someone space to figure out their own answers. And even though I'm not a parent, I see definite parallels in how to handle curiosity, whether it's with an adult or a child. There was an article this past week, maybe some of you saw it, in the Washington Post. It was the day after Christmas, and it was titled, "Kids Have an Endless Supply of Questions, but Answering Them Might Not Help Them Learn." And the author wrote, "Kids are naturally curious creatures, especially at a young age. Even if parents possess the knowledge to impart to their children, without the reward of first struggling and then seeking the answers, kids may end up losing their curiosity rather than nurturing it." You could easily change that saying to if we are all naturally curious, and even Google or a coach or a consultant or friend, even if it can give us the answers, without the reward of struggling or seeking, we end up losing our curiosity instead of nurturing it. So this is one type of two unanswered questions that I want to talk about today. It's a question that has an answer, but we don't know it, and we often don't have the patience to at least try to figure it out using our creativity or our powers of deduction. And I'd venture to say when it comes to creativity and problem solving, you use it or you lose it. And then there's a second type, which is a question that might have an answer, but we don't know what it is, and we may never know. This is what I consider to be a huge part of open inquiry, which is the core value that we're exploring this month. If you take the opposite of open as closed inquiry would mean only asking questions that you can answer with relative finite certainty. If we embraced closed inquiry, C3 would say, here's the answer, capital T, capital A. Here's the answer, now try to live up to it. I think that's what a lot of us were exposed to in other traditions. Instead, with our open inquiry, we say, here's the question, and here's another question. Oh, wait, there's one more question. Oh, and by the way, I don't have the answer. Can you live with that? And that's why I love this place. So a few weeks ago, when Kent asked the question in the pre-talk, what is meant by a spiritual life? I picked up a numinous wink. If you recall, he talked about numinous, and I think of numinous as a little bit like synchronicity. It's a little more than a coincidence. This wink from the universe when I got into my car after the gathering, and Blue Lake was playing The Unanswered Question by Charles Ives. I didn't catch the wink right away. That came later when I woke up at 4 a.m., and I realized, almost like it's my first waking thought, what is meant by a spiritual life? Living the unanswered questions. My spiritual life is one long, unanswered, and unanswerable question. And this is where I want to spend most of my time this morning. We all have different ideas of what a spiritual life and journey looks and feels like. I can only speak for myself and my own perspective and experience. And in my mind, I'm not looking for answers so much as I am asking lots of questions. And where it shifts from being a research project or an intellectual exercise to becoming spiritual is when I ask the questions, I release attachment to needing answers. And I can fully accept that there are likely no answers. There's a time and place for answers, and I wish Dick Kaminsky was here because he's very answer. Is he? There he is, Dick, I'm talking to you. There's a time and place for answers, right? But so I'm not talking about like throwing answers out the window and being in the wild, wild west. It's more that in matters of spirituality, answers usually lead to certainty, and certainty shuts down mystery. So here's how I've come to think of the journey. And before I launch into it, I just want to say, as I share this, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Because I know from being in community with you all for almost 2 years that these are points that I'm about to make that you either know because you've studied them or you know them intuitively. Because this is a very smart room. So I'm not pretending that this is new information. But I am sharing it in the hope that you'll hear it fresh and consider where you are now on your journey, and in particular, maybe where other people in your life are on their journey. Because if we recognize that someone is in a different place from us, we can let go of our need to be right or to prove them wrong, and we can just listen. Because I hear so much conflict and stress that comes from responding to someone else's opinion or belief that doesn't match our own with, "You just don't get it." What if we said, "Yeah, I don't get what you're saying. You don't get what I'm saying." And so in the scheme of things, if nobody's getting hurt, does it really matter? Is it really that important? So here's what I've been thinking about. I mentioned recently in the talk back that about 14 years ago, I watched a series called Living the Questions. Is anybody familiar or has watched that series? Okay, so a couple people. It's a video series that was put out around, I said 14 years ago. What is that, 2004, 2005, something like that, that features a range of interviews with progressive Christian theologians and religious leaders. And they're just looking at Christianity and the Bible and Jesus from all these different angles. And it had a really, really profound impact on me. At the time, and where I watched it, I was active in a UCC new church start in Traverse City called the Potter's House. And our philosophy was best summed up by our tagline on our bumper stickers that said, "You should come, it's not that bad." You can kind of tell who our market was, people like me. Going there was my first exposure to progressive Christianity. And I credit them and the Living the Question series for giving me a path to reclaim my identity as a Christian. Marcus Borg was one of the many theologians who became a hero to me. He was featured pretty heavily in the series. I found particular value in one of his frameworks that he used to describe one's relationship to the Bible and their spiritual journey. He described 3 different phases of spiritual growth. First was pre-critical naivete. How's that for a phrase? I like saying it. It feels smart. That's the phase that all of us as children go through when we believe Christmas and Easter stories as fact. We don't question them. Well, of course, it happened this way. And then by extension, we accept as facts things like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or the stork. We just take them as truth and we don't question them. At some point, hopefully, everyone in early adulthood or, varying times, we all transition into the next phase, which is critical thinking. We start noticing that the stories don't hang together very well. There's not much logic to them. I mean, really, how can a virgin have a child? Would a man really die and come to life again 3 days later? How on earth could someone walk on water or carry 2 heavy stone tablets down from the mountaintop or give birth at age 90? They can't. When we apply our rational scientific mind to these questions, we have to conclude that they are not possible. At best, knowing the truth about these stories just means that we live in a world grounded in reality. We don't think too much about it, and at our best, we don't harshly judge others who still believe. But at worst, the critical thinking stage can leave us cynical and dismissive of anything that smacks of fantasy or asks us to suspend reality, like flying Christmas rainbow unicorns. We think if we can't prove it, it's not real. And it's in this phase that many people lose their faith. They find it difficult to reconcile historical facts and science with the stories they grew up with. They decide there's very little, if anything, about it that can be trusted. And if they get really judgy about it, they decide that anyone else who believes in those stories must be stupid or naive or willfully ignorant. Just read any comment thread in a story about religion on the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you'll see exactly what I mean. So according to Borg, everyone gets to the critical thinking stage, and lots of people stay there. It's where our intellect likes to be, being able to rationalize our lives and what happens to us, knowing why things are the way they are, and trusting that if there's no answer, it's just because we haven't thought hard enough about it yet, or maybe it was just a stupid question in the first place. There was a perfect demonstration of what critical thinking sounds like this week when people started responding to a tweet from Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. Did I say that right? Thank you. Okay, here's what he tweeted. Today, I join millions around the world in celebrating the arrival of divinity on earth, who came into this world not in riches, but in poverty, not as a citizen, but as a refugee. No matter where and how we celebrate, Merry Christmas. And I read that and I was like, oh, what a beautiful message. And as you can imagine, there were lots of people who did not think it was a beautiful message. There were lots of responses on Twitter, with one person responding that Mayor Pete was a liar. Another wrote that nothing about this tweet is correct. The Washington Post article that followed that tweet pointed out that his words reflected a popular talking point among the Christian left. The article also stated that the citizenship status of Jesus is of such debate because it has real implications for how Christians on both sides of the aisle conduct policy moving forward. Why are we doing policy on Jesus' birth? I don't know, but that's another topic. In the post comment section, someone, I'm guessing, who is in the critical thinking stage wrote, "The only thing to divide is those that believe BS and those that don't." The same person commented again and just wrote fairy tales. And another time, religion is BS. Someone else interjected a different energy into the debate when they wrote, "So whether or not we have compassion for poor people and refugees depends on whether Jesus was a poor person and or a refugee." That comment is something of a bridge between critical thinking and the next phase, which is post-critical naivete. The mantra in this space is best summed up by the beautiful line that Cindy Anderson shared when she shared her meditation a few weeks ago, one that I'm still thinking about, that beautiful story. And she started out with, "I don't know if it happened this way, but I know this story is true." That was another phrase that I heard for the first time during the Living the Question series that Borg shared, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks when I first heard it. It allows room for a mystery and imagination and even mature innocence. It was completely liberating. It set me free from the feeling that I had to accept biblical and religious stories as fact. I could instead see them as containing truth. Growing up in a relatively conservative Catholic household, I had never heard of such a thing. Up to that point, I thought I either had to believe it or not. And if I didn't believe in those stories, there was no place in organized religion, no place in church for me. Instead, now I suddenly realized, I could doubt. I could question. I could disagree. I could recognize that a story isn't fact, but still had truth and something to teach me. And this is why post-critical naivete matters and why it's worth stretching into. If we stay in critical thinking, the world is divided into black and white, good and bad, my truth or your lies. Going back to the responses to Buttigieg's tweet, when our politicians and their followers are stuck in critical thinking, they are being guided by the wrong questions. And in this case, that question was Jesus born a poor refugee? Yes or no? To them, it matters. And it matters so much that they create policy based on it. They choose to be guided by something that doesn't really matter, when the message we should be taking from the Bible is to love and care for one another. I'm guessing most of us in this room, probably all of us in this room, have some areas of our lives where we are in critical thinking stage, and some other areas of our lives where we're in post-critical naivete. And where we are on the continuum might change depending on who we're talking to or what the circumstances or the topic is. And I admit to thinking very highly of myself. And of course, I'm in post-critical naivete all the time. But I know that's not true. I'm still in the critical thinking stage when it comes to some aspects of church, and I'm sure other areas of my life, but this is the one I think of particularly. When I go to a traditional church, it's almost impossible for me to say the creed or to say some of the hymns or prayers that I grew up with because I can't get past the literal words, like always referring to God as he and him, or saying that Jesus rose from the dead and will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. It's really hard for me to tease apart those words from what I feel is the patriarchal or the judgmental intention that's behind them. I can't get past the words to the essence, and so I reject them pretty much entirely. If I allowed myself to go into post-critical naivete, I might appreciate them as a relic and as a poetic expression of a particular time and place and culture, very different than my own. And I credit my husband for helping me think of it that way. He said, it's poetry. And so, can you shift a little bit your relationship to it? And I can't. I'm still struggling with that. So, if I was able to shift to that, though, I might be able to hold those words more lightly. I might be able to reabsorb the underlying message that there's a unifying presence or energy to acknowledge, or that hope might come again. Instead, my mind gets stuck. I think, do you really think you know what God's pronouns are? I can't imagine God's email signature saying, my pronouns, he, him, his. I think it would be more like her, him, their, etc. But I digress. We can move through that stuckness if we want to by changing the questions that we ask. The best questions aren't, and we heard a little bit about this last week from Kent, the best questions aren't about if something did or didn't happen, or if it was fact or if it wasn't. The best questions are ones that ask about the meaning and the underlying truth that the storyteller is trying to communicate. There's always an invitation to see the world from post-critical naivete, or as Rilke put it in the reading we heard a minute ago, live the questions. What does it mean to live the questions, especially the unanswered ones? Why bother if there's no definitive answer? We bother because certainty closes us off. It suffocates curiosity and it discourages open inquiry. The unanswered questions keep us guessing and reflecting and engaged with one another and always leave us open to discovery. To live the questions means to ask and be genuinely interested in what comes up and not immediately judge it as right or wrong, good or bad. You're asking questions not to confirm your bias or to prove that you're right and someone else is wrong. You just enjoy the possibilities and you let your mind play a game of what if? I think of the Zen quote, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Focusing on the answer, that is, focusing on attaining enlightenment, isn't what's important. What's important is doing the work. What's important is setting aside the need to know ego. It's up to each of us to keep asking the big questions and responding and living them as best we can. I think that's what Rilke meant when he said, perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. We don't find the answer and we don't state the answer. We live into it. It's not an intellectual exercise, but a spiritual evolution. This topic reminds me of my talk from February. If you were here, if you recall, we talked about liminal space. Liminal space is that place of uncertainty. It's the threshold between the known and the unknown, where whatever comforts and rituals that you had are not available to you anymore, and you don't know what's going to come next. And liminal spaces are absolutely stuffed with unanswered questions. It's one reason why they're so uncomfortable. If we can release attachment to needing answers and trust the longer arc of the process, we can move through that space more gracefully. And Nicholas, in your opening song, you had a line. You said, I think, life happens in the in-between. And that, to me, is the liminal space. And that's what we're talking about here. Another part of this journey is discerning which questions are worth having the answers to and which ones, in pursuit of the answers, take us out of the present moment and with it, out of possibility. One quick story. I learned this lesson back in 2012 when I got serious about writing my book. Actually, instead of getting serious about writing my book, I got serious about the question, is this going to be self-published or is it going to be traditionally published? And I was in angst for months, and I was researching and thinking and researching some more. And it turns out I was focused on the wrong question. I had this epiphany one day. I think we were actually up at the cabin on Old Mission, and I was looking out over the woods, and I just said, I've been asking the wrong question. The real question is, how is this book going to show up? And the answer was, if you write it. Duh. I realized that it really didn't matter what form it took. It wasn't going to take any form if I didn't put my butt in the chair and write. So I started. I hired a freelance editor to work with me on the first draft and keep me accountable. I went to a writer's conference, I found an agent, and then we sold the book to a publisher. And that, to me, is an example of living the questions, taking them seriously but holding them lightly, and asking the right question. And that brings me to one final story about a small, simple way that I practice being at peace with not knowing. In a way, this is a third type of question, the one that we ask that has an answer, but we don't need to know what it is. Who here likes to know what time it is? Who needs to know at all times? What time is it? Okay, I'm one of those people. It was my senior recital, and we were in the last movement of the last piece. It's a trio for clarinet, cello, and piano. I'm a clarinetist. And things had gone very well up until that point. We were in the final variation of the last movement's theme when I messed up. I missed an entrance. And I recovered quickly. I probably only missed by a beat or two, but still, I messed up. And so later that week, I was debriefing with my teacher, and he asked me, "Do you know what happened right there?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." And he said, "You looked at your watch." Like, why on earth would I look at my watch? Because that's who I am. So even now, 26 years later, whenever I check the time, when I really don't need to know the time, I think of my senior recital. Every single time. I'm like back on that stage. It's almost been a compulsion of mine over the years to have to know what time it is. Like when I go into a room, the first thing I look for is like, where's the clock? And then I have to know. And even I admit, like I'm sitting here and Nicholas is playing a beautiful song and I'm thinking, what time is it? And I thought, I don't need to know. It's really not important. And I even had to resist the urge to like do this a little bit in the mirror to see if I could see a reflection of the clock. I kid you not. And so, geez. So it's like, it's there all the time, right? And, so it feels like a spiritual practice to me to let go of needing to know what time it is, especially when there's no point. For instance, I'm at a movie, or I'm at a concert, or a dinner party, or I'm here at this gathering with you. Not checking it helps me to be more present in the moment and to be fully in tune with what's happening around me and to be more connected instead of being preoccupied with what's going to happen next. And there are plenty of times every day when I do need to know the time, like if I'm working with a client. But there are definitely way more times that I can let go the question and just be. I don't need to be obsessed. I can let "what time is it?" be an unanswered question, which is one small way of releasing control and being more comfortable with not knowing. When every fiber of my being needs to know the answer, I ask myself, would knowing this really change anything? And if the answer is no, I try to let it go. So checking the time during a client session, that's an answer I need to have. Checking the time during a recital or a concert or a movie or this gathering, 99% of the time, it's not a question or it's not an answer that I need. And so if I feel the impulse to look at the clock or look at my phone, I use it as a reminder to just be here now. This is one small example of how being okay with an unanswered question can help us to cultivate patience and presence. While satisfying my "what time is it?" curiosity is not existential angst, it does have a ripple effect that helps me to be more open and connected when the mind-bending questions come around. And as for those questions, those bigger spiritual ones, having an answer based in concrete evidence and replicable results doesn't matter to me, at least not in terms of how I choose to live in my daily life. So you probably can't see it, but I'm wearing a necklace that has a vintage typewriter key on it. And the symbols on it is a question mark and a slash. And this is how much muscle memory I had to go and look at my keyboard, is a question mark and a slash really on the same key, or is that just coincidence? I bought this in Seattle about 4 years ago. The question mark reminds me to stay curious, and the slash reminds me to live in the both and as opposed to the either or. Both and thinking means that something can be both myth and truth, fiction and truth. It can even be impossible and truth. Here are my closing questions for you. Where can you let go of the need to know? Can you allow yourself to be vulnerable in that way? Because it is vulnerable not having the answers. Can you be more patient and creative when you're faced with an information gap? And what practices or reminders will help you to set aside any ego and be okay with not knowing? That Kids Asking Endless Questions article that I mentioned at the start offered another perfect thought for today's topic. And in the quote I'm about to share, I've substituted general pronouns wherever it said kids. Of course, we won't successfully find the answers to all questions simply because we're curious. But if nothing else, encouraging everyone to remain inquisitive could give them the experience of experimentation and research. Sometimes even the questions that remain unanswered can drive us to keep learning and lead to more questions and future opportunities. Every day we're alive is an unanswered question. Our entire life is an unanswered question. We can never predict with certainty from one moment to the next what's going to happen. And so, what choices do we have? There's a time and a place for the choice of taking a controlled and rational approach that focuses on facts and logics and structure and processes. And we can keep that approach from becoming a straitjacket, something that limits us, by following that drive to keep learning and allowing mystery and imagination to be equal dance partners. So I'm going to pivot here for a second because you asked a coach to talk at the end of the year, and this is like our happy time, right? Because everybody's setting resolutions and intentions, and we're talking about what you can let go. So be careful when you give a coach a microphone and a stage at the end of the year. Out in the lobby is an intention station. I don't have a sign on it, but you'll find it because there's a shredder on the table, and it's going to be right around to the left. And so there are also some index cards and pens, and I invite you to do two things. One, write down something you want to let go of from the past year, or just something you need to let go of in general. We did this exercise in the 9 o'clock gathering, and there were some really beautiful things that people shared amongst, I want to let go of grievances that I might have against another person. I want to let go of what other people think. I want to let go of procrastination. I want to let go of being angry about Trump all the time. So what do you want to let go of? Because when we let go of something, we create space for something new and something that we are welcoming. Because often that thing we let go is something that's really just kind of bogging us down. It's really wearing us out. So you have an index card, write down what you want to let go, and then shred that sucker, okay? Take a picture of it if you need to, if you want to remember it. But part of letting it go is letting it go. So just go ahead and shred it. And then there's another card that I invite you to take and say, what am I going to welcome during 2020? What do I want to create? What is my intention? What's the focus that I want to have? I already said mine was partly, be bold. And I think one of my words is evolution. And I realized, is it evolution or revolution? And then a friend reminded me, he said, I'm a fan of, the parentheses with the letter. So it is now parentheses are evolution. So it gets to be revolution and evolution at the same time. So take a moment to do that, I invite you. And please leave the intention that you write in the basket that's next to the shredder. And I ask you to just trust me what happens to those as an unanswered question. I'll get back to you on it. And in putting your hopes and your intentions down on paper, you're asking the universe a question that may or may not be answered. If and when an answer comes, it might not be obvious, and it most certainly won't happen on your schedule, and it won't happen if you keep checking your watch. Trust that the value is in asking the question. Thank you.